In the ever-twisting maze of deception, secrets, and shifting loyalties that define General Hospital, one reckless act ignites a powder keg of manipulation, blackmail, and familial crisis. Christina, in a desperate emotional spiral, sabotaged Rick's car by slicing its brake line, a decision that nearly cost both Rick and Elizabeth their lives. Her intentions, clouded by fury and desperation, weren't meant to result in carnage, but the consequences were far more catastrophic than she imagined. Once the truth began to bubble to the surface, it didn't just threaten Christina's freedom, it pulled her entire family into a dangerous web of extortion and betrayal, and forced Michael to confront the kind of man he truly wanted to be. Ava, cunning as ever, wasted no time when she uncovered the truth. Rather than going to the police, she saw a golden opportunity. She approached Alexis with a threat not just against Christina's future but against the very fabric of the Davis family's safety. Alexis, now tasked with overseeing the Cassadine fortune after Nicholas's disappearance and Valentine's disinterest in family stewardship, had access to vast sums of money, and Ava wanted a piece of it. If Alexis didn't comply, Ava promised to go public with Christina's crime. It was blackmail, pure and simple, and Alexis knew there was no safe path out. Rick, always drawn to power and equally resentful of being sidelined in the Cassadine legacy, aligned himself with Ava. Together, they formed a ruthless, opportunistic duo, using Christina's impulsive act as leverage against Alexis's integrity and legacy. Alexis, in a rare moment of vulnerability, confessed the situation to Christina. The guilt consumed Christina, who had been trying to move forward from her mistake in silence, burdened by the knowledge of what she'd done. She reached out to the one person she believed would protect her unconditionally, Michael. As a Corinthos by blood and Quartermain by name, Michael understood power plays and family politics all too well. What he did not expect, however, was to find himself at the center of a chessboard where his sister, mother, and the family's public reputation were all under siege. Michael understood immediately that Rick and Ava were playing a long game, using Christina as a pawn to extort money and influence. But he also knew something they didn't. Sonny was no longer interested in standing idle when it came to protecting his children. Despite his tumultuous relationship with Rick, his own half-brother, Sonny had recently neutralized a threat in Sidwell, a man who had tried to manipulate Port Charles from the shadows. With Sidwell removed from the picture, Sonny had resources and clarity, and Michael saw an opportunity to use his father's influence to shift the power dynamic. Sonny's involvement wasn't about brute force, at least not initially. Michael approached him not with demands but with a plea for support, not just for Christina's sake, but to preserve what was left of Alexis's professional and personal reputation. Sonny agreed, not because he had any love left for Alexis, but because Christina was his daughter, and if Rick and Ava thought they could use her as a bargaining chip, they clearly forgot who they were dealing with. Michael's strategy wasn't reliant on intimidation alone. He knew Ava and Rick wouldn't be easily scared off, they thrived on secrets and leverage. So, Michael turned to another ally, Felicia, with her extensive network and investigative skills, and possibly Spinelli, whose digital prowess had exposed numerous schemes in the past. If they could uncover anything on Ava or Rick, old financial crimes, tampering, fraud, anything, they could dismantle the couple's credibility and force a ceasefire. But even that might not be enough. These weren't adversaries who responded to reason, they responded to incentives or pressure. Michael's ace in the hole, however, wasn't a threat or a dossier of criminal acts. It was money. Pure, overwhelming wealth. He didn't want this blackmail scandal to escalate into a courtroom battle or a media frenzy. So he crafted a simpler solution: pay them off. Quietly, definitively. He offered a substantial sum to Rick and Ava on the condition that they destroy all evidence of Christina's crime, cease their blackmail, and walk away from the Cassadine estate's financial affairs entirely. To Alexis, this was a humiliating resolution. A woman who had spent her life defending the law, often to her own detriment, was now being saved by a son she didn't raise and a checkbook she never asked to be opened. But Christina's freedom mattered more than pride. Michael assured Alexis that any trace of missing funds would be returned. He quietly redirected the embezzled amount that Ava and Rick had filtered through a shell company, reversing the transaction through a network of financial transfers designed to conceal the movement. Within days, Alexis's accounts were whole again, and on paper, nothing had ever happened. Of course, nothing in Port Charles stays buried forever. Rick, while taking the payoff, made a veiled threat: if anything were to happen to him or Ava, the truth about Christina's sabotage would still find its way to the authorities. Michael, not one to leave loose ends, instructed Spinelli to digitally scrub any forensic trail linking Christina to Rick's car. The logs were cleaned. The metadata erased. The shell company dissolved. And suddenly, Ava and Rick were holding a secret without proof, something far less valuable than they had believed. As a final measure, Sonny paid Rick a personal visit. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but Sonny made it clear that if Christina's name surfaced again in connection to the brake line incident, Rick's life in Port Charles would become far less comfortable. Sonny didn't need to say more. The message was understood. Christina, freed from the specter of prison, was left with a moral burden that couldn't be paid off. She had to face the fact that her impulsive act could have cost lives, and that her family had gone to extraordinary lengths to shield her from justice. Alexis returned to her practice, shaken but legally untouched. Michael resumed his quiet role as the fixer, stepping deeper into the role of family protector that neither Sonny nor the Quartermains had ever truly filled. But the wounds remained. Rick and Ava might be quiet for now, but their silence was a choice, not a defeat. They had been paid, but not broken. And in Port Charles, unresolved grudges tend to resurface when the timing is right. As for Christina, she would have to wrestle with the truth that while her family had saved her, it came at the cost of justice, and perhaps, her soul. In the end, the crisis had been managed. The evidence had vanished. The blackmail neutralized. But the damage, emotional, familial, and moral, would linger long after the dust settled.